Welcome to I Must Sleep, a journey through the darker chapters of human history, told with the calm pace of academic inquiry and the gentle rhythm designed for rest. I am your guide through the shadows of the past, where we explore, not to sensationalize, but to understand. Every story we tell is grounded in historical evidence, archaeological discovery, and scholarly research. We examine what people believed, why they believed it, and how these beliefs shaped civilizations. Tonight, we travel back over 4,000 years to the land between two rivers, Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization. Here, in what is now modern Iraq, humanity first learned to write, to build cities, to organize complex societies. And here, in the world's oldest written records, we find humanity's first demons. This video presents these beliefs from a historical and educational perspective. We will examine cuneiform tablets, archaeological artifacts, and ancient religious texts to understand how the Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians conceived of evil, chaos, and the supernatural forces they believed threatened their world. Over the next 3 hours, we will meet the demons of the ancient Near East. We will learn their names, understand their natures, and discover why these beings held such power over the human imagination. The content you're about to hear draws from primary sources: clay tablets inscribed in cuneiform, housed in museums from London to Baghdad. We cite our sources, we provide context, and we approach these ancient beliefs with the respect they deserve as windows into the human experience. Find yourself in a comfortable position. Lower the lights if you wish. Let the steady pace of historical narrative carry you through the night. Our journey begins in Sumer, in the 3rd millennium before the Common Era, where writing itself was young, and the boundaries between the world of humans and the world of spirits were dangerously thin. Part 1. The Mesopotamian Worldview. Before we can understand the demons of Mesopotamia, we must first understand the world in which they existed, a world fundamentally different from our own, yet hauntingly familiar in its deepest fears and hopes. The land between two rivers. Mesopotamia, from the Greek words meaning between rivers, encompasses the fertile plains between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. This is where agriculture first allowed humans to settle permanently, where the first cities rose from the earth, where kings first claimed divine authority. But this was also a harsh and unpredictable landscape. The rivers that gave life could also bring destruction through catastrophic floods. The climate was extreme, scorching summers and cold winters. Diseases swept through crowded cities. Infant mortality was devastating. Wars between city-states were constant. In this environment, the ancient Mesopotamians developed a complex religious worldview to explain their suffering and their occasional good fortune. The nature of the divine. The Mesopotamians believed in hundreds of gods arranged in elaborate hierarchies. At the top were the great cosmic deities, Anu, the Sky Father, Enlil, god of wind and storms, Ea or Enki, god of wisdom and fresh waters. Below them were countless lesser deities, each with specific domains and responsibilities. But the gods were not purely benevolent, they were powerful, often capricious, and fundamentally other. Humans existed, according to Mesopotamian creation myths, to serve the gods, to work the fields, to build the temples, to offer sacrifices. The gods needed humans, but they did not necessarily love them. when disaster struck, plague, famine, flood, military defeat, it was understood as divine punishment for human failings, or simply as the result of conflicts among the gods themselves, with humans caught in the crossfire. The concept of demons. Within this worldview, demons occupied a specific and important role. They were not gods, but they possessed supernatural power. They were not purely evil in the way later monotheistic traditions would conceive of evil, but they were dangerous, unpredictable, and hostile to human well-being. The Mesopotamian word often translated as demon is Utukku in Sumerian, later Utukku or Sebettu in Akkadian, but these terms didn't carry exactly the same meaning as our modern word demon. An Utukku could be benevolent or malevolent. The difference lay in their relationship to cosmic order. The Mesopotamians conceived of the universe as a constant struggle between order and chaos. The gods maintained order, the regular flooding of rivers, the cycle of seasons, the structure of society. Demons were agents of chaos. They brought disease, madness, nightmares, and death. Sources of demonic power. Where did demons come from? The ancient texts offer several explanations. Some demons were primordial beings, existing since the beginning of time, never fully controlled by the gods. Others were the restless dead, people who died violent deaths or who were not properly buried, or whose families failed to perform the necessary funerary rites. These spirits wandered the earth, envious of the living, seeking to harm them. Still other demons were the offspring of gods and monsters, or were created by the gods themselves to serve specific purposes. The boundaries were fluid. A protective spirit could become malevolent if angered. A demon could be controlled and directed by a knowledgeable priest. The spirit world's geography. The demons inhabited specific locations. They lurked in deserts and wastelands, far from the ordered space of the city. They haunted ruins and abandoned buildings. They gathered at crossroads and doorways, liminal spaces, thresholds between one realm and another. They were particularly active at twilight and in the dark hours before dawn, when the boundary between day and night was uncertain. They could enter homes through cracks in walls, through improperly sealed windows, through doorways that lacked protective amulets. The underworld, called Irkala or Kur, was their ultimate domain. This was not a place of punishment in the way later religions would conceive hell, but rather a dark, dusty realm where the dead existed as pale shadows of their former selves. From this underworld, demons could sometimes escape to torment the living. Human vulnerability. Humans were vulnerable to demonic attack at specific times. Illness, particularly sudden or unexplained illness, was often attributed to demons. Pregnant women and newborn infants were especially at risk, reflecting the tragic reality that childbirth and early infancy were times of terrible danger in the ancient world. Mental illness, seizures, nightmares, all were understood as demonic possession or influence. The person afflicted was not at fault. They were victims of supernatural attack. This understanding, while incorrect by modern medical standards, at least removed moral blame from those suffering. The role of priests and exorcists. This brings us to the crucial role of the Ashipu, the exorcist priest, and the Asu, the physician. These were distinct professions in ancient Mesopotamia, though they sometimes worked together. The Ashipu diagnosed spiritual causes of illness and performed elaborate rituals to drive out demons. These weren't simple ceremonies but could involve days of preparation, precise incantations in the sacred language, specific offerings, and carefully prescribed actions. Thousands of cuneiform tablets preserve these rituals. They show a sophisticated system of diagnosis and treatment based on observation of symptoms, careful matching of demons to diseases, and standardized therapeutic procedures. The exorcist priests were highly trained professionals, not charlatans, working within a coherent medical religious system. Archaeological evidence. How do we know all this? The Mesopotamians left us an extraordinary record. They wrote on clay tablets, which survive remarkably well when baked, or even when simply dried. Hundreds of thousands of these tablets have been recovered from ancient cities like Uruk, Ur, Nippur, Nineveh, and Babylon. Many tablets deal with demons, describing their appearances, listing their names, recording the incantations and rituals used against them. Other tablets are administrative records that mention payments to exorcist priests, or medical texts describing treatments for various ailments. Archaeological excavations have also uncovered thousands of protective amulets, small clay or stone objects inscribed with images of protective spirits or demons, meant to be worn on the body or placed in homes. These material objects prove that belief in demons wasn't limited to priests and kings, but permeated all levels of society. Museums around the world house these artifacts. The British Museum in London has extensive Mesopotamian collections. The Louvre in Paris, the Pergamon Museum in Berlin, the Oriental Institute in Chicago, the Iraq Museum in Baghdad, all preserve these tangible links to ancient belief. With this context established, we can now turn to the demons themselves. We will meet them one by one, learning their names and natures, understanding what they represented to the ancient Mesopotamians, and discovering how people sought to protect themselves. We begin with perhaps the most feared demon in all of Mesopotamian mythology, a being so terrifying that her very name caused people to reach for protective amulets. We begin with Lamashtu. Part 2. Lamashtu, the child-snatcher. Her name appears in the earliest Sumerian texts as Dimi. In later Akkadian, she is Lamashtu. For over 2,000 years, across multiple civilizations that rose and fell in Mesopotamia, she was feared above almost all other demons. Lamashtu was the demon who killed infants and children. She caused miscarriages. She brought disease to pregnant women. She stole newborn babies from their mother's arms and drank their blood, or so the ancient texts claim. In a world where half of all children died before age 5, where childbirth could easily kill the mother, Lamashtu embodied humanity's deepest terror, nature. Unlike most demons, Lamashtu was not merely a spirit or a ghost. The ancient texts identify her as the daughter of Anu, the supreme sky god and head of the Mesopotamian pantheon. This made her a goddess by birth, though a fallen one. The Sumerian incantations tell us that she was the daughter of Anu, who was not married to a god. This phrase is significant. In Mesopotamian divine society, goddesses typically gained their status and roles through marriage to gods. Lamashtu, unmarried, existed outside the proper divine order. Some scholars interpret this to mean that Lamashtu was rebellious, refusing her assigned place in the cosmic hierarchy. Others suggest she was cast out for her violent nature. The texts don't give us a clear narrative of her fall, but they're unanimous in describing her as operating outside divine law. And thus, particularly dangerous. Physical description. The ancient Mesopotamians left us detailed descriptions of Lamashtu's appearance, preserved in incantation tablets and depicted on protective amulets. She was imagined as a composite being, combining human and animal features in disturbing ways. Her head was described as leonine, like that of a lion. Her body was that of a woman, but emaciated, skeletal. Her hands were talons, her feet the clawed feet of a bird of prey, specifically an Anzu bird, a mythical creature associated with storms and chaos. She had the ears of a donkey, a sacred animal in some contexts, but here suggesting wildness and association with the desert. Her teeth were those of a predator. Her breasts were prominent but empty, often depicted in art as hanging down, sometimes with a pig and a dog suckling from them, animals considered unclean in Mesopotamian culture. This image was not accidental or arbitrary. Every element communicated danger, impurity, and the violation of natural boundaries. She combined female and animal, human and beast, in ways that contradicted the ordered categories by which the Mesopotamians understood their world. Lamashtu's actions and victims. The ancient medical and magical texts describe Lamashtu's attacks in specific clinical detail. These descriptions reveal the real human suffering behind the mythological imagery. Lamashtu was believed to attack women during pregnancy, causing complications, pain, and miscarriage. Texts describe her as touching the woman 7 times, each touch bringing greater danger. She caused fever, bleeding, and premature labor if the child was born. Lamashtu sought to steal it. She would enter the house at night, approaching the child while it slept. She would touch the child's head 7 times, causing it to sicken. The child would develop fever, stop eating, cry constantly, and gradually waste away. These symptoms match what we would now recognize as various childhood diseases, infections, malnutrition, neurological disorders. In the ancient world, without understanding of germ theory or pediatric medicine, these mysterious infant deaths required explanation. Lamashtu provided that explanation, but Lamashtu's malice extended beyond infants. She was said to cause nightmares in adults. She brought disease to livestock, particularly cows and sheep, affecting their milk and fertility. She contaminated water sources. She even caused crops to fail. Some texts describe her as particularly targeting the poor and vulnerable, those without the resources to afford elaborate protective rituals or expensive amulets. This detail adds a poignant social dimension to the belief. Lamashtu's attacks mapped onto actual patterns of suffering, where poverty increased vulnerability to disease and death. The 7-fold nature. The number 7 appears repeatedly in descriptions of Lamashtu. She touches her victims 7 times. She has 7 names. Some texts mention 7 Lamashtu demons, suggesting either that she manifests in multiple forms or that she leads a group of similar beings. 7 was a significant number in Mesopotamian numerology, associated with completeness and cosmic order, but also with danger. The 7 days of the lunar week, the 7 planets visible to ancient astronomers, the 7 gates of the underworld. Lamashtu's association with 7 may have indicated her fundamental connection to cosmic forces, even in her chaotic manifestation. Protective measures given Lamashtu's terrible power, the Mesopotamians developed elaborate defenses against her. These ranged from simple amulets worn by pregnant women to complex multi-day rituals performed by professional exorcist priests. The most common protective objects were small plaques, usually made of bronze or clay, inscribed with images and incantations. Archaeologists have found thousands of these plaques throughout Mesopotamia. They follow a standard iconography, suggesting they were mass-produced, a sort of ancient medical religious technology available to ordinary people. A typical Lamashtu plaque, such as those displayed in the Louvre or the British Museum, shows Lamashtu herself at the center, usually in a birthing position, emphasizing her connection to childbirth. She stands or kneels in a boat, crossing the river of the underworld, a motif suggesting she is being sent back to the realm of the dead. Above her appear protective deities and spirits. Below her, protective inscriptions invoke the gods and command Lamashtu to depart. The logic was clear. By depicting Lamashtu's departure, the amulet made that departure real. The image had power. Pregnant women wore these amulets around their necks. Households hung them near doorways or over cradles. The physical presence of the amulet provided psychological comfort, and perhaps, in a world where belief could become self-fulfilling, actual therapeutic benefit through reduced anxiety and stress. The role of Pazuzu. Here we encounter one of the most interesting aspects of Mesopotamian demonology, the use of one demon to ward off another. Pazuzu, whom we will discuss in depth shortly, was himself a powerful and frightening demon, the king of the wind demons. But Pazuzu was believed to be an enemy of Lamashtu, and his terrifying presence could drive her away. Many protective amulets show Pazuzu's distinctive face, with bulging eyes, grimacing mouth, and grotesque features. On the reverse side, the pregnant woman wore Lamashtu's image against her chest and Pazuzu's image facing outward, as if the demon king stood guard against the child-snatcher. This practice reveals a sophisticated understanding. Power was neutral, and even dark power could be redirected for protection. The Mesopotamians were pragmatic in their approach to the supernatural. They used whatever worked. Ritual exorcisms. For serious cases, when a child was already sick and dying, believed to be in Lamashtu's grip, more elaborate measures were required. The family would hire an ashipu, an exorcist priest, to perform a multi-day ritual. These rituals are preserved in detail on cuneiform tablets, particularly in texts from the first millennium BCE. They involved preparation. The house was ritually purified. Specific offerings were prepared: figurines of Lamashtu made from clay or dough, small boats, miniature provisions. Incantation. The priest recited lengthy spells in Sumerian, the ancient sacred language no longer spoken in daily life, but preserved for ritual use. These incantations commanded Lamashtu to leave, offering her bribes, food, drink, passage to the underworld. Symbolic actions. The priest created figurines representing Lamashtu and ritually cast them out of the house. He prepared a small boat containing offerings and set it on the river, symbolically sending Lamashtu back to the underworld. Protective installation. Finally, the priest installed permanent protective amulets and inscribed protective formulas on the doorposts. These rituals could last 3 days or more and were expensive. Wealthy families could afford them, poor families often could not. This economic reality meant that Lamashtu's attacks, which is to say, childhood illness and mortality, fell most heavily on those least able to afford protection. Historical and cultural context. Modern historians and anthropologists understand Lamashtu as a cultural construct that helped the Mesopotamians process unbearable grief. In a world where up to half of all children died before age 5, where every pregnancy was potentially fatal for the mother, where disease struck seemingly at random, belief in Lamashtu provided both explanation and a sense of possible control. If illness came from a demon, then demons could be fought, rituals could be performed, prayers said, amulets worn. Parents had something to do rather than simply watch helplessly as their children suffered. This psychological function cannot be underestimated. Moreover, the belief in Lamashtu removed moral blame. A sick child was not being punished for sin, nor were the parents being judged. They were victims of external malevolent forces, unfortunate but not guilty. This is actually a humane approach to suffering, especially compared to religious systems that attributed all suffering to divine punishment. Archaeological evidence. The widespread fear of Lamashtu is confirmed by the sheer number of protective amulets that have survived. The British Museum alone holds dozens of Lamashtu plaques. Every major museum with a Near Eastern collection has examples. These amulets date from the 9th century BCE through the 4th century BCE, over 500 years of continuous production and use. They've been found in every kind of archaeological context: royal palaces and humble homes, rich burials and simple graves. Lamashtu's threat crossed all social boundaries. Chemical analysis of some bronze amulets shows they were worn extensively, the surface worn smooth by constant contact with skin and cloth. These weren't ceremonial objects kept in temples but daily protective devices, worn until they literally wore out. Excavations of ancient Mesopotamian homes have found amulets still in their original positions, hanging near doorways, buried under thresholds, placed in wall niches near where children would have slept. These discoveries provide tangible evidence of how ordinary people lived with their beliefs, how they tried to protect what they loved most. Legacy and influence. Lamashtu's influence extended beyond Mesopotamia. When the Hebrew peoples encountered Mesopotamian culture, they absorbed and transformed elements of it. The figure of Lilith in Jewish demonology, a female demon who attacks infants and pregnant women, shows clear parallels to Lamashtu. Later Greek and Roman traditions also feature similar demonic figures: Empusa, Mormo, Gallu, demons who threaten children. These similarities may represent independent development of similar ideas, or they may reflect the diffusion of Mesopotamian beliefs as cultures interacted through trade and conquest. Even today, in some Middle Eastern cultures, beliefs about evil spirits that threaten infants persist, a thread connecting back thousands of years to the ancient fear embodied in Lamashtu. Conclusion: understanding through context as we move forward through other Mesopotamian demons. Keep Lamashtu in mind as an example of how these beliefs functioned. She wasn't an arbitrary monster invented to frighten people. She was a cultural response to real tragedy, a way of making sense of senseless loss, a focus for protective action in the face of helplessness. The ancient Mesopotamians were not ignorant or superstitious in any simple sense. They observed their world carefully, developed sophisticated explanations within their cultural framework, and created practical responses to suffering. Their beliefs were wrong by modern medical standards, but they were rational within their own context, and they served important psychological and social functions. With this understanding, we turn now to Lamashtu's great enemy, the demon whose terrifying power was invoked as protection, whose grotesque face was worn as a shield against evil. We turn to Pazuzu, king of the wind demons. Part 3. Pazuzu, the demon king who protects. If you've seen a certain famous horror film from 1973, you know Pazuzu's name. But the ancient reality of this demon is far more complex and interesting than Hollywood's version. Pazuzu was terrifying, yes, but he was also a protector. His story reveals the sophisticated nuance of Mesopotamian demonology. The king of the wind demons, Pazuzu's titles in the ancient texts tell us much about his nature. He is called King of the Evil Wind Demons, son of Hanbu, Hanbu being a lesser-known god associated with destructive winds. He was the brother of Humbaba, the monstrous guardian of the cedar forest, whom the hero Gilgamesh defeated in the famous Epic of Gilgamesh. Wind demons, in Mesopotamian belief, were particularly dangerous. They came from the deserts to the west and southwest, bringing scorching heat, sandstorms, and disease. Ancient peoples observed that certain diseases seemed to arrive with particular winds, what we would now understand as airborne pathogens, dust-borne illnesses, or simply the stress of extreme weather on vulnerable populations. Pazuzu, as king of these demons, commanded terrible power. Yet, paradoxically, this very power made him useful. Grotesque. His face was described and depicted as leonine, with bulging eyes that stared with hypnotic intensity. His mouth was open in a grimace or roar, revealing prominent canine teeth. His ears were large and pointed, sometimes compared to donkey ears, again suggesting wildness and the desert. He had a scaly body, combining human and reptilian features. His limbs were those of a lion or predatory bird, powerful, clawed, dangerous. Most distinctively, he possessed 4 wings, allowing him to command the winds and fly across vast distances. His right hand was typically raised in what scholars interpret as either a gesture of warding or of commanding. His left hand often pointed downward, toward the earth or the underworld. This posture suggested his power to cross boundaries between realms. His sexual organs were prominently depicted, often in the form of a serpent with a snake's head, a detail that scholars interpret as representing both fertility and danger, life force and destructive power combined. This composite image, human, animal, reptile, elements from multiple creatures, was designed to inspire fear and awe. Pazuzu was not meant to be appealing or comprehensible. He was meant to embody raw, primal power, the logic of protection. Here's where Mesopotamian demonology reveals its complexity. The very features that made Pazuzu terrifying also made him an effective protector. The logic went something like this. Lesser demons, including Lamashtu, feared beings more powerful than themselves. Pazuzu, as king of the wind demons, commanded sufficient power to intimidate and drive away other malevolent spirits. His grotesque appearance announced his power. His proven ability to cause harm, bringing devastating winds, stirring up sandstorms, spreading disease, meant he could turn that capacity against other demons. This is not unlike the historical practice of hiring fierce warriors for protection. Their capacity for violence made them valuable guards as long as they fought on your side. Pazuzu's violence, properly directed, could protect rather than harm. Protective amulets and images. The most common Pazuzu artifacts are bronze or clay plaques showing his distinctive face. These plaques were worn as amulets, hung in homes, particularly near doorways and windows, the points of entry for malevolent spirits. Many Lamashtu protection plaques, as we discussed, show Pazuzu's face on the reverse. The pregnant woman or new mother would wear Lamashtu's image against her chest, showing her departure and defeat, while Pazuzu's face faced outward, confronting any approaching threats. The British Museum's collection includes several magnificent bronze Pazuzu heads, some small enough to wear on a cord around the neck, others larger, meant to be mounted on walls or doorposts. These artifacts show signs of extensive use, worn smooth by handling, patinated by age and contact. One particularly fine example, dated to the 8th century BCE and discovered in what is now northern Iraq, shows Pazuzu's face in exquisite detail. Every scale on his reptilian skin is individually rendered. His eyes bulge with disturbing intensity. His mouth is open wide, revealing teeth that combine human incisors with predatory fangs. The craftsmanship is remarkable. This was clearly an important and expensive object, carefully made by a skilled artisan. But even simple, crude Pazuzu amulets have been found in ordinary homes and burials. The concept wasn't limited to the wealthy. Everyone needed protection from Lamashtu, and Pazuzu offered it. Ways serving as permanent guardians of the space. The Assyrian king Esarhaddon, who ruled in the 7th century BCE, had Pazuzu images installed in his palace. This wasn't a sign of demon worship, but of practical, supernatural defense. If Pazuzu protected common people's homes, how much more was he needed in a royal palace where the king and his family faced not only natural threats but also supernatural attacks from the king's many enemies? Incantations and rituals. Beyond physical amulets, Pazuzu was invoked through spoken incantations. Cuneiform tablets preserve these formulaic prayers, which follow a standard pattern. First, they acknowledge Pazuzu's power. Pazuzu, king of the evil wind demons, you who command the four winds, you whose power makes the heavens tremble. Second, they establish the threat. Lamashtu, daughter of Anu, comes to steal the child. Third, they make the petition. By your power, drive her away. By your command, send her to the underworld. Let your fearsome presence terrify her. Finally, they offer thanks and promise continued devotion. Pazuzu, protector of this house, I honor your name. I offer bread and beer. I speak your praises. These incantations reveal the transactional nature of Mesopotamian religion. The relationship with Pazuzu was not one of love or even worship in our sense. It was a contract, respect, and offerings in exchange for protection. As long as both parties upheld their obligations, the arrangement held. Pazuzu in literature. Pazuzu appears in various Mesopotamian literary texts, usually in his role as a powerful and dangerous figure. The most extensive reference comes from the Epic of Gilgamesh, where his brother Humbaba guards the sacred cedar forest. Humbaba is described in terms similar to Pazuzu, a composite monster with a frightening face, commanding power over natural forces. When Gilgamesh and his companion Enkidu defeat and kill Humbaba, they incur divine wrath. The point of the story seems to be that such powerful beings should not be casually challenged or destroyed. They serve important cosmic functions. This literary context adds depth to our understanding of Pazuzu. He was not simply a bogeyman to frighten children. He was a significant figure in Mesopotamian cosmology, connected to other important mythic beings, playing a role in maintaining the balance between order and chaos. The paradox of evil. Pazuzu's protective role raises interesting philosophical and theological questions. Can evil fight evil? Can a being of chaos defend order? Does the end justify the means? The Mesopotamians apparently had no problem with these questions. Their worldview was not dualistic in the way later Zoroastrian, Christian, or Islamic theology would be. They didn't divide the universe into absolute good versus absolute evil. Instead, they recognized that power was morally neutral. It was the application and direction of power that mattered. Pazuzu could bring devastating winds that destroyed crops and spread disease. But he could also drive away Lamashtu and protect the vulnerable. The same capacity for causing harm enabled him to prevent harm. This pragmatic approach to supernatural power reflects a sophisticated understanding of moral complexity. In some ways, this resembles modern approaches to immune system function or to controlled burning in forest management, using dangerous forces in controlled ways to prevent greater harm. The Mesopotamians understood that nature was not simply benign or malevolent, but contained forces that could be directed. Historical context. Wind and disease. Modern epidemiologists and historians of medicine have studied the relationship between wind patterns and disease outbreaks in the ancient Near East. Certain seasonal winds did indeed correlate with increased disease incidence. The hot, dry winds from the southwestern deserts, the very winds Pazuzu commanded, could carry dust storms that irritated lungs and eyes, weakening people's resistance to infection. These same winds brought extreme temperatures that stressed vulnerable populations, particularly the very young and very old. The ancients observed these correlations without understanding the mechanisms. They correctly identified wind as associated with disease, but attributed it to supernatural agencies rather than dust particles and bacteria. Given their knowledge base, demon possession by wind spirits was not an unreasonable hypothesis. Pazuzu, as master of these winds, was therefore both cause and potential solution. He controlled the winds. Perhaps he could redirect them. This belief gave people a sense of agency. Through proper ritual, they might influence outcomes that were actually determined by weather patterns and infectious disease transmission beyond their control. Archaeological distribution. Pazuzu amulets and statues have been found throughout Mesopotamia and beyond. They appear in Assyria in the north, in Babylonia in the south, and even in the western periphery, the Levant and Anatolia. This wide distribution suggests that belief in Pazuzu and his protective power spread beyond ethnic or political boundaries. He was recognized across different kingdoms and language groups, a truly international protective figure. The chronological distribution is also revealing. Pazuzu artifacts date primarily from the first millennium BCE, with the greatest concentration in the Neo-Assyrian period, 911. 609 BCE, and the Neo-Babylonian period, 626-539 BCE. This was a time of great empires, extensive warfare, and significant urbanization, all factors that might have increased anxiety and the perceived need for supernatural protection. Interestingly, Pazuzu artifacts largely disappear after the Persian conquest of Babylon in 539 BCE. As Mesopotamian traditional religion gradually gave way to Persian Zoroastrianism and later to Hellenistic influences, the old demons lost their hold on popular imagination, or, more likely, were transformed into new forms that we'll explore in later videos. Modern rediscovery. Pazuzu entered Western consciousness through archaeology. British and French excavations in the 19th century uncovered Pazuzu statues and plaques, which were brought back to European museums. Victorian scholars were fascinated and somewhat scandalized by these grotesque figures, especially by the prominent sexual elements. Early interpretations often emphasized the primitive superstition of ancient peoples. Later 20th century scholarship took a more respectful approach, recognizing the sophistication of Mesopotamian religion and the psychological and social functions these beliefs served. Then, in 1971, William Peter Blatty published his novel The Exorcist, drawing loosely on Pazuzu as the demon possessing a young girl. The 1973 film adaptation made Pazuzu's name known to millions. However, the Hollywood version bears little resemblance to the ancient demon. This is complete creative invention, not historical accuracy. Ironically, the modern association of Pazuzu with pure evil and demonic possession reverses his ancient role. The historical Pazuzu fought demons. He didn't possess humans. The confusion, perhaps, reflects modern Western. Lesson from Pazuzu. What can we learn from the strange figure of Pazuzu, the demon king who protects? First, that ancient peoples thought in more nuanced ways about good and evil than we sometimes give them credit for. They recognized that power itself was neutral. It was intention and context that mattered. Second, that supernatural beliefs often reflect pragmatic problem solving. Faced with genuine threats they couldn't fully understand or control, the Mesopotamians developed systems that provided psychological comfort and a sense of agency. Third, that fear can be redirected. The same image that inspired terror could, in the right context, provide protection. This psychological insight remains valid today. As we continue our journey through Mesopotamian demonology, we'll see these patterns repeat. Beliefs that served practical functions, complex moral thinking, and sophisticated ritual responses to suffering. We turn now to one of the oldest demonic figures in human literature, older even than Lamashtu, reaching back to Sumer in the 3rd millennium BCE. We turn to the female night demons called Lilitu, and particularly to the figure who would become known to later traditions as Lilith. Part 4. The Lilitu, Female Demons of the Night. In the darkness before dawn, when even brave souls feel vulnerable, the Lilitu were believed to hunt. These female spirits of the night embodied anxieties about sexuality, about death, about the dangerous powers of the feminine. Their story is among the oldest in human literature, and one that would echo through thousands of years of religious tradition. Origin in Sumerian literature. The earliest written reference to a Lilith-like figure appears in the Sumerian poem Gilgamesh and the Ulupu tree, dated to approximately 2000 BCE, though the oral traditions it records are surely older. In this poem, the goddess Inanna discovers a tree she wishes to grow for its wood to make a throne and a bed. But three creatures have made the tree their home: a serpent at its roots, an Anzu bird in its branches, and in its trunk, the demon Lilith, or Kisikil Lil La Cake, a phrase meaning something like maiden of desolation or spirit of the wilderness. These three creatures prevent Inanna from harvesting the tree. She calls upon the hero Gilgamesh, who drives them away. The poem tells us that Lilith fled to the wilderness, to the desert wastes beyond the ordered world of civilization. This earliest appearance already establishes key themes. Lilith is associated with wilderness and desolation, exists outside proper divine order, and represents a kind of dangerous female power that must be driven away to allow for domestication and civilized order. The Lilitu class of demons. As Akkadian replaced Sumerian as the primary language of Mesopotamia, the term evolved. In Akkadian texts, we find not a single Lilith, but a class of demons, the Lilitu, feminine, and Lilu, masculine, with related forms Ardot Lili and Irdu Lili. These were night demons, active during the hours of darkness. They were particularly associated with wind and storm, consistent with Pazuzu's domain. In fact, some texts suggest they were under Pazuzu's command or were his servants. The Lilitu were believed to be wandering spirits, souls of women who died young, particularly those who died as virgins or before having children. In Mesopotamian belief, the dead required living descendants to perform funerary rites and offerings. Women who died childless had no one to remember them, no one to sustain them in the afterlife. They became bitter, envious spirits, dangerous to the living. Characteristics and actions. The ancient texts describe the Lilitu in specific terms. They were beautiful but deadly, able to take seductive human form. They appeared in dreams and visions, particularly to men, offering sexual temptation. But this seduction was dangerous. Men who encountered a Lilitu in dreams would wake exhausted, weakened. If the encounters continued, the man would waste away, becoming ill and eventually dying. The Lilitu were essentially vampiric. They drained life force through sexual contact. This belief reflects real experiences, nocturnal emissions, erotic dreams, the exhaustion and shame that could follow, particularly in a culture with specific taboos around sexuality. Rather than locate these experiences within natural physiology and psychology, Mesopotamian culture attributed them to supernatural seduction. The Lilitu also targeted pregnant women and infants, like Lamashtu, though their methods differed. Where Lamashtu violently attacked, the Lilitu worked through subtle means: bad dreams that disturbed sleep, anxieties that affected health, a sense of oppression that could bring on complications. Some texts suggest the Lilitu could possess women, causing erratic behavior, rebellion against proper social roles, or mental disturbance. A woman who refused marriage, who rejected motherhood, who behaved in ways contrary to social expectations, she might be suspected of Lilitu influence. Gender, sexuality, and social control. Modern scholars recognize in the Lilitu beliefs a mechanism of social control, particularly regarding women's sexuality and social roles. In Mesopotamian society, as in most ancient cultures, women's primary value was defined through their roles as wives and mothers. A woman who existed outside these structures whether by choice or circumstance, was problematic, even threatening to social order. The Lilitu, as spirits of women who died unmarried and childless, embodied this threat. They represented the danger of female autonomy, of sexuality unconstrained by marriage and reproduction. By making these figures demonic, the culture reinforced proper gender roles. This doesn't mean the beliefs were cynically invented for social control. The people who believed in the Lilitu genuinely feared them, but beliefs don't exist in social vacuums. They always serve multiple functions, and reinforcing social structures is often one of them. Protective measures. Protective against the Lilitu followed patterns similar to defense against other demons, but with specific variations. Amulets often featured the names of protective angels or gods inscribed in patterns that were believed to trap or repel demons. These incantation bowls, ceramic bowls inscribed with protective spells in spiral patterns, have been found by the hundreds in Mesopotamian archaeological sites. A typical incantation bowl against Lilitu might read, "You are bound by the great seal, Lilith, daughter of desolation. You shall not enter this house. You shall not disturb the sleep of the term. You shall return to the desolate places, to the ruins and wastelands. By the authority of protective deity, you are commanded to depart." These bowls were placed upside down in homes, the idea being that the demon would be trapped under the bowl, caught by the spiral incantation that drew it inward and held it. Men who felt they were being visited by Lilitu in their dreams might undergo ritual purification. They would bathe in sacred waters, be fumigated with specific incenses, and have protective amulets placed on their persons while they slept. The exorcist priest might also perform rituals to banish the demon and create a protective barrier around the man's sleeping space. For women, particularly pregnant women, the protections merged with those against Lamashtu. The two types of female demons were sometimes conflated or seen as working together, so comprehensive protection was necessary. Literary and mythological context. Beyond the Gilgamesh poem, Lilith appears or is referenced in various Mesopotamian texts, though usually briefly. She's mentioned in incantation texts, in medical texts describing diseases attributed to her, in omen texts warning of her presence. One fascinating text, the Burney Relief, also called the Queen of the Night Relief, dating to around 1800 BCE and housed in the British Museum, shows a nude-winged female figure standing on lions and accompanied by owls. Some scholars have identified this figure as Lilith, though others argue she represents Inanna, or another goddess. If it is Lilith, it's our most detailed ancient image of her, beautiful but clearly supernatural, with her wings and bird talons for feet, associated with both the regal lions and the ominous owls, birds of the night. She wears a horned crown, indicating divine or semi-divine status. The relief captures the ambiguous nature of these figures, powerful, beautiful, divine in origin, yet dangerous and associated with death and the night. Evolution into Jewish traditions. Here's where the story gets particularly interesting for later religious history. When the Hebrew people were exiled to Babylon in the 6th century BCE, they encountered Mesopotamian demon beliefs, including the Lilitu. The Hebrew Bible mentions Lilith only once, in Isaiah 34:14. In a passage describing the desolation of Edom, wildcats shall meet with hyenas, goat demons shall call to each other. There too, Lilith shall repose and find a place to rest. This single verse places Lilith among wilderness creatures and demons in a desolate landscape, consistent with the Mesopotamian tradition. But it's a brief mention, not a developed mythology. However, in later Jewish texts, the Talmud, the Midrash, and particularly in medieval Jewish mysticism, Lilith becomes a major figure. The Alphabet of Ben Sira, a medieval satirical text, tells the famous story of Lilith as Adam's first wife, created equal to him, who refused to submit to him and fled Eden to become a demon. This later Jewish Lilith, rebellious, sexually autonomous, dangerous to children, clearly draws from the Mesopotamian Lilitu, but adds new layers of meaning relevant to Jewish theological concerns about evil, gender, and the origins of demons. The continuity is remarkable. From ancient Sumer in 2000 BCE to medieval Jewish mysticism in 1000 CE and beyond, 4,000 years. The figure persists, transformed but recognizable. Modern reception. In contemporary culture, Lilith has been reclaimed by some feminist scholars and writers as a symbol of female autonomy and resistance to patriarchal control. The demon becomes a proto-feminist hero, refusing to submit, claiming her own power. This modern reinterpretation is fascinating, but historically complex. The ancient Lilitu were genuinely frightening figures within their culture, not heroes. Their association with death, disease, and danger was real in Mesopotamian belief. Yet, the feminist reading isn't entirely ahistorical. The very fact that female autonomy was encoded as demonic reveals patriarchal anxieties. By reclaiming the figure, modern interpreters are essentially saying, what you call demonic, we call liberated. Whether one accepts this reinterpretation or prefers to keep ancient beliefs in their historical context, the persistence and evolution of Lilith/Litu is testament to the power of these ancient images. Archaeological evidence. While we have fewer specific Lilitu amulets compared to Lamashtu plaques or Pazuzu faces, we do have numerous incantation bowls mentioning Lilith by name, discovered in excavations throughout Mesopotamia and the Levant. These bowls date from the later periods, particularly the first millennium BCE and into the early Common Era. They show the continuation of these beliefs even as empires rose and fell, as languages changed, as new religions arrived. The bowls are typically simple ceramic vessels, but the inscriptions are intricate and beautiful. Written in Aramaic or Hebrew, often in spiral patterns that draw the eye inward, they combine text and visual art in service of protection. Museums like the Jewish Museum in New York, the British Museum, and university collections hold many examples. They're tangible evidence of daily religious practice, of how ordinary families sought protection from supernatural threats. Theological function. Like other Mesopotamian demons, the Lilitu served important theological and psychological functions. They explained phenomena that were otherwise mysterious or disturbing. Erotic dreams, nocturnal emissions, sleep disturbances, the lingering effects of grief and loss. For women who died young and childless, the concept of Lilitu provided a continued existence, even if a troubled one. They weren't simply erased, but transformed. This might have provided strange comfort to families. Their lost daughters, sisters, wives still existed in some form. The beliefs also channeled male anxieties about sexuality, desires that couldn't be openly acknowledged, nocturnal experiences that caused shame. By attributing these to external demonic forces, men could experience them without full moral responsibility. The demons seduced them. They were victims, not willing participants. This psychological mechanism, attributing unwanted thoughts or experiences to external forces, is sophisticated. It preserves the self-image while acknowledging real internal experiences. Conclusion: the enduring shadow. The Lilitu represent some of humanity's deepest and most persistent anxieties about death, sexuality, gender roles, the wilderness beyond civilization's boundaries. These anxieties don't disappear with modernity. They transform, find new expressions, but the underlying concerns remain. When we read ancient texts about Lilitu, we're not just learning about primitive superstition. We're seeing how our ancestors wrestled with the same questions we face. What lies beyond control and order? What happens to those who exist outside social structures? How do we manage desires and fears that threaten our sense of self? The demons were real enough, not as supernatural beings perhaps, but as psychological and social realities. Understanding them helps us understand ourselves. We move now from the seductive and subtle Lilitu to demons of pure violence and terror, the spirits of the vengeful dead, beings created specifically to punish and destroy. We turn to the Utukku. Part 5. The Utukku, Spirits of the Restless Dead. Death, in Mesopotamian belief, was not an ending but a transition to a shadowy afterlife in the underworld. But this transition required proper ritual. Bodies had to be correctly buried, funerary rites performed, offerings made by living descendants. When these requirements weren't met, when someone died violently, far from home, or was left unburied, their spirit could not rest. These restless dead became Utukku, the nature of the Utukku. The Sumerian word Udug and its Akkadian equivalent Utukku could refer to any spirit, good or evil. Context determined meaning. A protective household spirit might be called a good Utukku, but most often the term designated harmful spirits, demons who brought disease, madness, and misfortune. The harmful Utukku were specifically identified as spirits of the improperly dead. Mesopotamian texts categorize different types: those who died in the wilderness, far from civilization, whose bodies were never found or buried; those who drowned, whose bodies were taken by water; those who died violently, in war, by murder, by accident; those who died childless, with no descendants to make offerings; those whose families failed to perform the required funerary rites. All of these unfortunate souls were trapped between worlds, too dead to return to life, but unable to properly enter the afterlife. Their existence was one of suffering and rage, and they directed that rage at the living. How Utukku attacked. The ancient medical and magical texts describe Utukku attacks in clinical detail. These spirits were believed to cause sudden, severe illness. A person would be healthy one moment, then collapse with fever, seizures, or paralysis. This sudden onset, unexplainable by visible causes, marked Utukku possession. The Utukku entered the body through various means. They could penetrate through open orifices, mouth, ears, nostrils, particularly during sleep or moments of vulnerability. They were attracted to people who were already weakened by illness, grief, fear, or moral transgression. Once inside, the Utukku caused specific symptoms. Texts describe high fever and chills, violent headaches, seizures and convulsions, paralysis of limbs, loss of speech, madness and delusions, wasting diseases where the person gradually weakened. Modern medicine would diagnose these as various infections, neurological disorders, strokes, and mental illnesses. The Mesopotamians saw possession by restless spirits. 7 Utukku demons. Particularly dangerous were the 7 Utukku, a group of demons who work together to bring destruction. These appear in many incantation texts, described in vivid, terrifying terms. An Akkadian incantation preserved on tablets from the library of Ashurbanipal, 7th century BCE, describes them. They are 7. They are 7. In the depths of the ocean, they are 7. In the heights of heaven, they are 7. They were born in the depths of the ocean, in the inner chamber of the sky. They are neither male nor female. They are winds that stretch over the earth. They have no wife. They bear no son. They know neither mercy nor pity. They heed neither prayer nor supplication. This passage establishes several key characteristics. The 7 are primordial, existing since creation, born from the cosmic ocean and sky. They transcend gender, existing outside reproductive life and social structure. Most importantly, they are implacable, immune to pleading or bargaining. Other texts associate each of the 7 with specific forms of destruction: storm, flood, drought, plague, war, famine. They were cosmic forces of chaos, barely constrained by divine order. The Utukku and moral order. Interestingly, while most Utukku attacked indiscriminately, some texts suggest they particularly targeted sinners or wrongdoers, a person who violated sacred oaths, who harmed family members, who showed disrespect to gods or parents. Such people were especially vulnerable to Utukku possession. This belief served an important social function, reinforcing moral behavior. The threat of demonic attack provided supernatural enforcement of ethical norms. If legal punishment could be evaded, spiritual punishment awaited. However, the innocent could also suffer Utukku attacks, particularly if they were ritually impure or simply unlucky. The relationship between morality and suffering wasn't absolute. The Mesopotamians recognized that life was often unfair. Diagnosis and exorcism. When someone fell suddenly ill, the exorcist priest, Ashipu, would be called to diagnose whether an Utukku was responsible. This diagnosis involved careful observation of symptoms, questioning about the patient's recent activities and dreams, and divination practices. If Utukku possession was confirmed, elaborate exorcism rituals followed. These rituals, preserved in numerous cuneiform tablets, were complex multi-day affairs involving Day 1, identification. The priest performed divination to identify which specific type of Utukku had possessed the patient. Different spirits required different treatments. The divination might involve examining the liver of a sacrificed sheep, interpreting dreams, or reading omens in oil patterns on water. Day 2, preparation. The patient was ritually purified through bathing in water mixed with specific herbs and minerals. The room was fumigated with incense, cedar, cypress, and various aromatic plants. Protective circles were drawn and protective amulets placed around the patient. Day 3, expulsion. The core exorcism ritual occurred. The priest recited lengthy incantations, calling upon protective deities, particularly Enki, god of wisdom and magic, and Marduk, chief god of Babylon. These incantations commanded the Utukku to depart. Utukku of the desert, Utukku of the mountain, Utukku of the sea, Utukku of the graves, evil Utukku who seizes the body, who causes the flesh to waste away, who brings fever and trembling. By the command of Ea, by the authority of Marduk, by the protective power of patron deity, I command you, release this person. Return to the ruins and wasteland. Return to the graves and desolate places. Trouble this person no more? The priest might also create clay figurines representing the Utukku and ritually destroy them, throwing them into fire or water, symbolically destroying the demon's power. Day 4. Protection. After expulsion, the patient needed protection against repossession. Permanent amulets were provided, small clay tablets inscribed with protective spells to be worn constantly. Protective inscriptions might be placed on the doorposts of the patient's home. The patient was instructed in daily protective prayers to maintain spiritual defense. Archaeological evidence of Utukku. Evidence for Utukku beliefs is abundant in the archaeological record. The thousands of medical magical texts found in the libraries of ancient Mesopotamian cities, particularly the great library of Ashurbanipal at Nineveh, contain numerous references to Utukku possession and its treatment. These texts show a sophisticated diagnostic system. Different symptoms suggested different types of Utukku. The progression of illness indicated how long the demon had been present and how deeply embedded. The patient's moral history and recent behavior were considered relevant to determining vulnerability. Amulets specifically against Utukku are harder to identify than those against Lamashtu or featuring Pazuzu because Utukku were less visually distinctive. However, many general protective amulets, inscribed stones or clay tablets include incantations against evil Utukku, along with other demons. Grave sites throughout Mesopotamia show evidence of careful burial practices, clear attempts to ensure the dead would rest peacefully rather than become vengeful spirits. Bodies were positioned carefully, grave goods provided, and in some cases, inscriptions placed to guide the soul to the afterlife. Notably, archaeologists have found some graves that appear deliberately disturbed, not by modern tomb robbers, but in ancient times. Some scholars interpret these as deliberate desecration, perhaps of enemies, intended to prevent their proper burial and condemn them to become Utukku, forever tormented and tormenting. The psychology of restless dead. Modern scholars understand Utukku beliefs as reflecting deep human psychological needs around death and proper ritual. Death is traumatic for survivors. Proper funerary rituals serve important psychological functions. They provide a structured way to process grief. They create a sense of having done right by the deceased, and they mark a clear transition from the person being here to being definitively gone. When death occurs without proper ritual, sudden death, death far from home, disappearance, survivors face ambiguous loss. The person is gone but not properly departed. Psychologically, this is deeply troubling. The belief that such improperly dead became dangerous spirits gave structure to this ambiguous loss. It provided explanation for the continued distress survivors felt and motivated the completion of proper rituals, even in difficult circumstances. If a warrior died in battle, his body lost the family would still perform funerary rites, creating a symbolic burial. This protected both the dead warrior's spirit, preventing him from becoming Utukku, and the living family, who could now properly mourn and move forward. Social functions. Utukku beliefs reinforced several important social practices: proper burial, the considerable expense of proper burial, preparation of the body, grave goods, tomb construction, ongoing offerings, was justified by the threat of the alternative. To neglect proper burial was not just disrespectful, but dangerous. Family obligation. Children had solemn obligation to maintain their parents' tombs and make regular offerings. This strengthened family bonds and ensured care for the elderly, who could expect continued attention even after death. Treatment of enemies. While it might be tempting to deny enemies proper burial, the risk of creating dangerous Utukku gave pause. Even enemies were often buried correctly, preventing them from returning as vengeful spirits. Communal responsibility. If someone died with no family, the community was expected to provide basic burial. This humanitarian practice was reinforced by supernatural threat. Unburied corpses created dangers for everyone. Ancient Greek auroi, those who died before their time. Roman lemurs, malevolent spirits of the dead. Chinese gui, hungry ghosts. Japanese onryo, vengeful spirits, all parallel the Mesopotamian Utukku. This universality suggests the concept responds to genuine psychological and social needs. Every culture must deal with death, particularly with tragic, untimely, or improper death, creating a category of dangerous spirits that result from improper death rituals serves multiple functions across cultures. The Mesopotamian version is among the earliest and most fully documented, giving us detailed insight into how one ancient culture managed these universal human concerns. Evolution and persistence. Utukku beliefs didn't disappear with Mesopotamian civilization. As cultural influence spread, these concepts influenced neighboring peoples. Hebrew Shedim, demons, and Rephaim, shades of the dead, show Mesopotamian influence. Early Jewish demonology absorbed many Mesopotamian concepts during the Babylonian exile period. Similarly, when Greek culture encountered Mesopotamian religion through Alexander's conquests and the Hellenistic period, Greek concepts of dangerous spirits were enriched by contact with Mesopotamian demonology. Even into early Christianity, the idea of restless dead who hadn't received proper burial or prayers persisted, transforming into doctrines about purgatory and the importance of prayers for the dead. Conclusion. The duty to the dead. The Utukku remind us that ancient peoples took death seriously, not in a morbid way, but with deep recognition of its importance and of the obligations the living owed to the dead. These weren't arbitrary superstitions, but structured responses to genuine psychological and social needs. The beliefs ensured proper treatment of the dead, provided frameworks for processing grief, and created incentives for maintaining family and community bonds beyond death. As we continue through Mesopotamian demonology, we'll see how these practical concerns, protecting children, honoring the dead, maintaining social order, underlie even the strangest seeming beliefs. We turn now to perhaps the strangest and most cosmically significant of Mesopotamian demons, beings that threaten not just individuals or communities, but the very fabric of reality itself. We turn to the 7 evil gods, the Sebettu. Part 6. The Sebetta, the 7 evil gods. In the beginning, according to Mesopotamian mythology, was chaos. From that chaos, the gods brought forth order, separating heaven from earth, creating dry land from watery abyss, establishing the regular cycles of sun and moon, organizing the cosmos. But chaos was never fully defeated. It lurked at the edges of reality, always threatening to return. And its agents were the Sebettu, the 7 evil gods, storm demons of incomprehensible power. Mythological origins. The creation epic Enuma Elish, Babylon's most important religious text, describes the cosmic battle between order and chaos. The goddess Tiamat, embodiment of the primordial ocean and chaos, creates 11 monsters to fight the younger gods. These monsters include the Sebettu. The text describes them. She created the Hydra, the dragon, the hairy hero, the great demon, the mad dog, the scorpion man, the fierce storms, the fish man, the bull man, bearing unsparing weapons, fearless in battle. The Sebettu were thus present at creation itself. They were ancient even by the standards of the gods. When the hero god Marduk defeated Tiamat and established cosmic order, he subdued but did not destroy the Sebettu. They remained, bound by divine command, but never truly tamed. The nature of the 7. The Sebettu were not merely demons, but Elu Limnutu, evil gods. This distinction is important. They possess divine power, not merely supernatural power. They could act on cosmic scales, not just individual human scales. Mesopotamian texts describe them as storm demons, born of heaven and earth, associated with destructive winds, lightning, and tempests. They were agents of plague and pestilence, bringers of war and destruction. Importantly, they acted as a group. While individual Utukku might act alone, the Sebettu operated as a unit, 7 forces moving in terrible coordination. This made them exponentially more dangerous than any single demon. Visual representations. Unlike demons with consistent visual forms like Pazuzu or Lamashtu, the Sebettu were rarely depicted in art. This absence is itself significant. They may have been considered too dangerous to image or too vast and terrible to be captured in physical form. When they do appear, it's usually as abstract symbols: 7 stars, 7 weapons, 7 flames. In some boundary stones and cylinder seals, 7 dots or marks represent them, simple indicators of overwhelming power that didn't require elaborate depiction. This abstract representation may reflect their fundamental nature. They weren't individual beings with personalities, but forces, more like hurricanes or earthquakes given minimal consciousness and maximal destructive power. The Sebettu in literature. Several important Mesopotamian texts feature the Sebettu. In one myth, the god Era, also called Nergal, god of plague and war, becomes dissatisfied with peace. He summons the Sebettu as his weapons, and together they nearly destroy human civilization. The Era epic, a lengthy poem from the 8th century BCE, describes the chaos. Era, mighty among gods, made his weapons gleam. He summoned the 7 incomparable warriors. Rise up, mighty 7, stand at my right hand, go forth into the cities. Spread pestilence and terror. Let the just and unjust alike fall before you. Let neither prayer nor righteousness save them. The seven obey, and cities fall. Plague spreads. Armies destroy each other. Even the gods are horrified by the destruction. Finally, Era's counselor Isham persuades him to relent, and the Sebettu are bound once more. This myth served important cultural functions. It explained why terrible disasters occurred, not through human sin necessarily, but through divine caprice, through the unleashing of primordial forces. It also reassured people that even cosmic destruction had limits. The gods themselves would eventually restore order, the seven as celestial phenomena. Modern scholars have noted that the Sebettu may have astronomical significance. 7 celestial bodies were visible to ancient Mesopotamian astronomers: Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. These planets and the luminaries moved through the heavens according to complex patterns that early astronomers struggled to understand and predict. Their movements seemed to correlate with earthly events: wars, plagues, good harvests, disasters. The Sebettu may thus represent these celestial powers, forces that moved according to their own logic, that could not be controlled, but that profoundly affected human life. When the planets aligned in ominous configurations, when eclipses occurred, when comets appeared, these were the Sebettu made manifest. This astronomical interpretation doesn't diminish the religious significance, but rather shows the sophisticated way Mesopotamians integrated observation and belief. They watched the skies carefully, seeking patterns that might help them predict and prepare for disaster. Protection against the Sebettu. Given their cosmic power, protecting against the Sebettu was exceptionally difficult. Individual amulets and household rituals that might ward off ordinary demons were insufficient. Instead, protection required large-scale ritual action, often performed by the state on behalf of the entire community. When omens suggested the Sebettu were active, unusual celestial phenomena, the appearance of specific weather patterns, the king and high priests would perform elaborate protective ceremonies. These rituals involved national purification. The entire city would undergo ritual cleansing. Streets were swept and purified. Temples were reconsecrated. People bathed ritually. Massive sacrifices. Hundreds of animals might be sacrificed to appease the gods and request protection. Royal ritual. The king, as intermediary between gods and people, would perform specific ceremonies. In some cases, this involved temporary ritual replacement of the king. A substitute king would be crowned, bear any cosmic punishment, then be killed, and the true king restored. Apotropaic rituals. Throughout the city, protective inscriptions were renewed, images of protective spirits reinstalled, boundary stones re-sanctified. These were not minor undertakings but massive civic events involving the entire population and significant economic resources. The threat of the Sebettu required proportional response. Historical context. Understanding disaster. Why did the Mesopotamians develop this elaborate mythology of cosmic destruction? The answer lies in their historical experience. Mesopotamia was subject to catastrophic disasters. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers could flood unpredictably, destroying cities and drowning thousands. Droughts could bring famine. Plagues swept through crowded urban populations with devastating effect. Earthquakes, while less common than in some regions, did occur. Wars between city-states could destroy entire populations. These disasters seemed random, striking righteous and wicked alike, destroying cities that had carefully maintained religious observances. How could this be explained in a world where divine justice was assumed? The Sebettu provided an explanation. Sometimes, chaos simply erupted, overwhelming even divine order temporarily. These weren't acts of punishment, but cosmic struggles between order and chaos. Humans were caught in forces beyond their control or comprehension. This is actually a sophisticated theological response to the problem of innocent suffering. Rather than blaming victims or asserting that suffering must indicate sin, the Mesopotamians acknowledged that cosmic forces could cause unjust suffering. Archaeological evidence. While visual representations of the Sebettu are rare, textual evidence is abundant. The era epic exists in multiple copies, indicating it was widely distributed and repeatedly copied. Omen texts frequently mention the seven in association with specific astronomical or meteorological phenomena. Boundary stones and inscriptions from various periods invoke protection against the Sebettu. Official correspondence between cities includes warnings about bad omens, suggesting the Seven's activity. This documentary evidence shows these weren't merely literary myths, but integrated into practical decision-making. Kings consulted omens about the Sebettu before launching military campaigns or beginning major construction projects. Cities performed protective rituals when signs suggested danger, influence on later traditions. The concept of seven destructive beings, cosmic forces of chaos, appears in later religious traditions. The seven-headed dragon of chaos in the biblical book of Revelation shows possible Mesopotamian influence. Early Jewish apocalyptic literature mentions seven angels of destruction. Whether these represent direct borrowing or independent development of similar mythological structures is debated by scholars. But the parallels are striking and suggest the power of the number seven and its association with cosmic forces. Philosophical implications. The Sebettu raise profound questions about the nature of evil in Mesopotamian thought. Were they evil by nature, or were they simply forces of chaos that transcended moral categories? The texts seem to suggest the latter. The Sebettu don't act from malice in any personal sense. They don't hate humanity or seek revenge. They simply are destructive, in the way a storm is destructive. They're natural forces, barely conscious, operating according to their inherent nature. This represents a sophisticated philosophical position. Evil is not necessarily intentional or personal. It can be structural, inherent in the nature of reality itself. Order is always threatened by chaos, and the forces of chaos are not moral agents, but simply aspects of existence. This stands in contrast to later dualistic religious systems that personalize evil, making it a conscious choice by a rebel angel or malevolent deity. The Mesopotamian view is more complex and perhaps more aligned with modern understanding of natural disasters and impersonal destructive forces. Part 7. Lesser-known demons. Allu, Gallu, and Rabisu. Not all Mesopotamian demons achieved the fame of Lamashtu or Pazuzu. Some operated in the shadows, less frequently invoked but no less feared by those who encountered them. These lesser-known beings reveal the complexity and detail of Mesopotamian demonology, a rich, textured world of supernatural threats, each with specific characteristics and methods. We'll explore 3: the Allu, the Gallu, and the Rabisu. The Allu, demon without a mouth, among the strangest demons in the Mesopotamian catalog, is the Allu. a being described in the ancient texts as having no mouth, no lips, no ability to speak. Physical descriptions are sparse and contradictory. Some texts suggest the Alu had no face at all, just blank skin where features should be. Others describe it as having eyes and nose, but lacking the mouth and jaw. It was invisible or partially visible, manifesting as a shadow or a presence rather than a fully material form. How the Alu attacked. Despite lacking a mouth, the Alu consumed its victims. The texts explain this through magical means. It absorbed life force directly, without need for physical eating. Its victims would weaken gradually, becoming lethargic, losing appetite, wasting away over days or weeks. The Alu specialized in attacking sleeping people. It would creep into bedrooms at night, hover over the sleeper, and drain their vitality. Victims would wake feeling exhausted, as if they hadn't slept at all, and with a sense of oppression or dread. Modern interpreters recognize these symptoms as consistent with sleep paralysis, a condition where people wake but remain temporarily unable to move, often experiencing a sense of presence or pressure on the chest. The Alu provided a supernatural explanation for this terrifying experience. Protection against the Alu. Because the Alu attacked during sleep, protective measures focused on the bedroom. Amulets were placed under pillows or hung above the bed. Specific incantations were recited before sleep, creating a protective barrier. One such incantation, preserved on a tablet from the British Museum's collection, reads, "Alu who has no mouth, who has no tongue, who comes in the night, who hovers in darkness, by the sacred words of Ea, by the protective names, you shall not enter this room, you shall not approach this bed, you shall not touch this sleeper. Return to the empty places, return to the ruins. Trouble this person no more." Some texts recommend placing specific herbs, including garlic, which modern research has shown does have antimicrobial properties around the sleeping area. Whether the herbs had actual protective effect or provided psychological comfort, they were part of a comprehensive defensive system. Cultural meaning. The Alu's lack of a mouth may symbolize the ultimate violation of human communication and social bonds. In Mesopotamian culture, speech was fundamental to human identity. It distinguished humans from animals, enabled civilization, allowed for prayer and ritual. A being that lacked speech but still possessed intelligence and malice represented something profoundly disturbing. An entity outside the social order, unreachable by negotiation or appeal. You couldn't reason with the Alu, couldn't plea with it. It simply consumed, silently, inexorably. The Gallu, demons of the underworld. The Gallu were particularly associated with the realm of death. They were servants or officers of Ereshkigal, queen of the underworld, tasked with dragging souls to their final destination. Origins and nature. According to myth, the Gallu were created by Ereshkigal to populate her kingdom and enforce her laws. They were neither fully divine nor entirely monstrous, but occupied a middle category, supernatural beings with specific duties. Unlike demons who attacked indiscriminately, the Gallu were selective. They targeted those whose time had come, those who had escaped death but were owed to the underworld, or those who violated underworld law. The famous myth. The most detailed account of the Gallu appears in The Descent of Inanna, one of the most important Mesopotamian myths. In this story, the goddess Inanna descends to the underworld to visit her sister Ereshkigal. According to underworld law, anyone who enters cannot leave without providing a substitute. When Inanna returns to the upper world, the Gallu accompany her, seeking someone to take her place in the underworld. The text describes them vividly. The demons who accompanied her. The demons do not eat food, do not drink water. They accept no gracious gifts. They do not enjoy the pleasure of love. They do not dance to the sound of music. They tear the wife from the embrace of her husband. They snatch the child from the embrace of its mother. In the myth, the Gallu eventually take Inanna's husband Dumuzi to the underworld, despite his pleas. The story establishes the inexorability of death. Even divine intervention can only delay, not prevent it. Historical understanding. Scholars interpret the Gallu as personifications of death's inevitability. Every culture must help its members accept mortality, and the Gallu served this function. They removed the randomness from death, making it a structured process carried out by specific beings following specific laws. When someone died, particularly if death was sudden or untimely, saying the Gallu took them provided explanation and a kind of order. It wasn't meaningless tragedy, but the fulfillment of cosmic law, protection, or acceptance. Interestingly, protective rituals against the Gallu are rare. This suggests a recognition that some things cannot and should not be prevented. When the Gallu came, it meant death had arrived, and fighting was futile. Instead, Mesopotamian rituals focused on ensuring the Gallu took the right person, that someone wasn't taken before their time due to mistaken identity or supernatural error. Amulets identified the wearer, established their status as still belonging to the world of the living. But when time came, acceptance was the appropriate response. This reflects a mature attitude toward mortality. Fighting against the inevitable causes suffering, while acceptance brings peace. The Rabisu, the demon who crouches. The Rabisu was an ambush demon. Its name means the one who crouches, or the one who lies in wait. This demon specialized in attacking people at moments of vulnerability, particularly at thresholds and boundaries. Habits and methods. The Rabisu lurked in specific locations, doorways and gates as people entered or left crossroads, where travelers must choose direction, boundaries between cultivated fields and wilderness, the shores of rivers and canals, dark corners and shadowed places. It would crouch invisibly, waiting for someone to pass, then spring upon them. The attack was sudden. The person would feel a sharp pain, often in the side or chest, and would collapse. This could result in sudden death or in a lingering illness characterized by pain in the affected area. Modern diagnosis might suggest heart attacks, strokes, or sudden infections as the actual causes. But for the Mesopotamians, these sudden attacks, especially occurring at specific vulnerable locations, indicated Rabisu involvement, symbolic meaning. The Rabisu's association with thresholds and boundaries is deeply significant. Liminal spaces, places between one state and another, were inherently dangerous in Mesopotamian thought. Crossing a threshold meant leaving protected space for unprotected space. Traveling between cities meant leaving the ordered world of civilization for the chaos of wilderness. Even entering a new day through the threshold of sleep was risky. The Rabisu embodied the dangers of transition and change. In a culture that valued stability and order, moments of transition were psychologically threatening, and the Rabisu gave form to that threat: protection. Doorways and gates received particular protective attention. Stone tablets inscribed with protective formulas were embedded in doorframes. Figurines of protective spirits were buried under thresholds. Travelers performed brief rituals before leaving cities, asking for safe passage through the demon-haunted spaces beyond walls. One common protective practice was to briefly pause at any threshold, murmur a protective prayer, and deliberately step across with the right foot first. This moment of mindfulness served both magical and practical purposes. It made the person aware of the transition they were making and prepared them mentally for whatever lay ahead. Archaeological evidence. Excavations of Mesopotamian buildings consistently find evidence of threshold rituals. Small offerings buried under doorways, protective inscriptions carved into door frames, amulets placed in wall niches near entrances, all testify to the importance of protecting these vulnerable points. The ancient city of for example, showed evidence of elaborate door rituals in both elite and common houses. Regardless of wealth, every household protected its entrances, suggesting the universality of these beliefs. Common themes among lesser demons. These three demons, Allu, Gallu, and Rabisu, share certain characteristics that reveal broader patterns in Mesopotamian demonology. Specificity. Each demon had specific methods, preferred victims, and characteristic attack patterns. This wasn't a vague sense of general evil, but a detailed taxonomy of supernatural threats. This specificity allowed for targeted protective measures and gave people a sense of understanding and potential control. Connection to real experiences. Each demon explained genuine phenomena: sleep paralysis, sudden death, the psychological stress of transitional moments. The demons made sense of experiences that were otherwise frightening and inexplicable. Ritual responses. For each demon, Mesopotamian culture developed specific protective rituals. These weren't arbitrary superstitions, but structured responses based on the demon's perceived nature. If Allu attacked during sleep, protect the bedroom. If Rabisu lurked at thresholds, fortify doorways. Social and psychological functions. The beliefs served important functions beyond simple explanation. They channeled anxiety into manageable forms, provided actionable responses to fear, and created shared cultural frameworks for discussing difficult experiences. Conclusion. The richness of the demonic world. These lesser-known demons remind us of the extraordinary richness and detail of Mesopotamian religious thought. This wasn't a simple binary of good versus evil, but a complex world populated by numerous beings, each with distinct characteristics, each requiring specific understanding and response. Modern people might dismiss these beliefs as primitive superstition, but this would be a mistake. What we see here is sophisticated systematic thinking, observation of phenomena, development of explanatory frameworks, creation of practical responses, and cultural transmission of knowledge. The ancient Mesopotamians were doing the best they could with the knowledge available to them. They observed carefully, thought systematically, and created comprehensive systems for understanding and managing threats. That these systems were wrong in their specifics doesn't diminish the sophistication of the thinking behind them. As we move toward the conclusion of our journey through Mesopotamian demonology, we'll examine how these beliefs functioned in practice, the role of exorcist priests, the economic and social structures supporting demon beliefs, and the ultimate meaning these concepts held for people who lived with them daily. Part 8. the Practice of Exorcism, Priests, Rituals, and Social Structures. Understanding Mesopotamian demons requires understanding the human systems developed to combat them. This was not a world of helpless victims cowering before supernatural threats. It was a world of active response, of specialized knowledge, of professional practitioners who devoted their lives to protecting others from demonic attack. We turn now to the practice of exorcism in ancient Mesopotamia. The priests who performed it, the rituals they used, and the social structures that supported this crucial work. The Ashipu, exorcist priest. In Mesopotamian society, the Ashipu was a respected and important professional. This was not a part-time role or a charismatic calling, but a career requiring years of training and mastery of extensive specialized knowledge. Training. An Ashipu apprenticed for many years, typically beginning in adolescence. The apprentice learned to read and write cuneiform, a skill limited to a small, educated elite. More importantly, he learned the extensive corpus of magical and medical texts, memorizing thousands of incantations, learning to diagnose different types of demonic possession, and mastering the complex rituals required for exorcism. The training was rigorous. Texts had to be copied repeatedly until memorized perfectly. A single error in an incantation could render it ineffective or even dangerous. The apprentice learned the properties of hundreds of plants, minerals, and animal parts used in ritual. He studied divination techniques, reading omens and sheep livers, interpreting dreams, analyzing celestial phenomena. Finally, he learned the practical skills of ritual performance, how to create the sacred space, how to time rituals according to astronomical calculations, how to manage clients' expectations and fears. Social status. A successful Ashipu could achieve significant wealth and status. He was consulted not just by common people but by kings and high officials. The most skilled exorcists might be attached to royal courts, receiving regular stipends and luxury accommodations. But even modest village exorcists held respected positions. They were educated men in a largely illiterate society, keepers of sacred knowledge, intermediaries between human and divine realms. This status came with responsibility. An exorcist who performed rituals incompetently or who took advantage of clients' desperation risked both his reputation and, according to belief, divine punishment. The Asu physician, importantly, the exorcist Ashipu was distinct from the physician Asu, though they often worked together. The Asu focused on physical remedies, herbal medicines, surgical procedures, setting broken bones. The Ashipu addressed spiritual causes of illness, however. The boundary was not absolute. Many conditions were understood to have both physical and spiritual components. A skilled practitioner understood when to refer a patient to his counterpart, and the best practitioners of each type respected the other's expertise. Medical texts sometimes include instructions like, if the symptoms are X, the Asu should treat with remedy Y. If the symptoms are Z, the Ashipu should be consulted, as this indicates demon possession. This proto-medical division of labor shows sophisticated thinking about disease causation and treatment. The Mesopotamians recognized that different problems required different solutions. Diagnostic procedures. Before performing an exorcism, the Ashipu had to diagnose the problem. Not every illness indicated demonic possession. Some had purely physical causes amenable to medical treatment. Accurate diagnosis was crucial. Initial consultation. The process began with detailed questioning. When did symptoms begin? What exactly does the patient experience? Have there been dreams or visions? Has the patient violated any religious obligations or social taboos? Has the family properly maintained ancestral offerings? The Ashipu observed carefully. The patient's appearance, the color of eyes and skin, the nature of any pain or discomfort, all provided diagnostic clues. Divination. For unclear cases, the Ashipu employed divination. Several methods were common. Hepatoscopy. A sheep would be sacrificed and its liver examined. The liver was understood as a microcosm reflecting cosmic and spiritual realities. Specific features: the shape of lobes, the color of certain portions, the presence of unusual markings, indicated different spiritual conditions. Models of livers made from clay, inscribed with interpretive guides, have been found by archaeologists. These served as teaching tools and reference guides, showing that hepatoscopy was a standardized practice, not mere superstition. Oil and water. The Ashipu would drop oil into a bowl of water and observe the patterns formed, how the oil spread, whether it sank or floated, the shapes it created. All were interpreted according to established systems of meaning. In exorcism, the Ashipu had to diagnose the problem. Not every illness indicated demonic possession. Some had purely physical causes amenable to medical treatment. Accurate diagnosis was crucial. Initial consultation. The process began with detailed questioning. When did symptoms begin? What exactly does the patient experience? Have there been dreams or visions? Has the patient violated any religious obligations or social taboos? Has the family properly maintained ancestral offerings? The Ashipu observed carefully. The patient's appearance, the color of eyes and skin, the nature of any pain or discomfort, all provided diagnostic clues. Divination. For unclear cases, the Ashipu employed divination. Several methods were common. Hepatoscopy. A sheep would be sacrificed and its liver examined. The liver was understood as a microcosm reflecting cosmic and spiritual realities. Specific features: the shape of lobes, the color of certain portions, the presence of unusual markings, indicated different spiritual conditions. Models of livers made from clay, inscribed with interpretive guides, have been found by archaeologists. These served as teaching tools and reference guides, showing that hepatoscopy was a standardized practice, not mere superstition. Oil and water. The Ashipu would drop oil into a bowl of water and observe the patterns formed, how the oil spread, whether it sank or floated, the shapes it created. All were interpreted according to established systems of meaning. Exorcism rituals, structure, and components. Once demonic possession was diagnosed, the exorcism ritual could begin. While specific details varied depending on which demon was involved and the severity of the case, certain elements were common to most rituals. Purification. Day 1. The patient and the space where the ritual would occur both required purification. The patient would bathe in water mixed with specific purifying substances, salt, certain herbs, sometimes milk or beer. This wasn't merely symbolic, but was believed to physically remove spiritual contamination. The room was fumigated with incense, particularly cedar, cypress, and juniper. These aromatic woods burned slowly, filled the space with smoke believed to drive away malevolent spirits. Modern science notes that some of these substances do have antiseptic properties, so they may have provided actual health benefits alongside their ritual significance. All participants in the ritual, the ashapu, any assistants, family members who would be present, also underwent purification. Ritual purity was essential. Contamination could compromise the entire procedure. 2. The ashipu would create a protective circle or boundary around the patient. This might be done with flour or other powders sprinkled in a circle, holy water sprinkled around the perimeter, protective figurines placed at cardinal directions, inscribed clay tablets embedded in the floor or walls. Within this protected space, the demon could be confronted without the exorcist himself being attacked. The boundary served both spiritual and psychological purposes. It marked off a special space where extraordinary things could occur. Invocation of protective deities. Day 2. Before confronting the demon, the ashipu invoked protective gods and spirits. The incantations followed standard formulas. E, Lord of the deep waters, fond of all wisdom, Marduk, mighty God, vanquisher of chaos, Shamash, Lord of justice, who sees all things. I call upon your names. I invoke your protection. By your power, let this demon be bound. By your authority, let it be cast out. Stand at my right hand, strengthen my words, make my rituals effective, hear my prayers. These invocations established divine authorization for what followed. The exorcist didn't act on his own authority, but as an agent of the gods. This theological framework was crucial. It meant that success didn't depend on the exorcist's personal power, but on proper execution of divinely sanctioned procedures. Confrontation with the demon. Day 2. 3. This was the dramatic core of the ritual. The exorcist directly addressed the possessing demon, commanding it to depart. The incantations were lengthy and formulaic. They typically included identification, naming the demon specifically. Knowing the true name gave power over the named being. Command, direct orders to leave the patient's body and return to its proper place. The wilderness, the ruins. The underworld. Threat, invocation of divine punishment if the demon refused to obey. By the authority of Marduk, if you do not depart, you shall be cast into fire. If you do not release this person, you shall be bound in the deepest pit. Bribery. Sometimes demons were offered incentives, food, drink, goods, if they would leave peacefully. Depart now, and I will provide offerings for you at the city gate. Leave this person, and bread and beer shall be yours. Repetition. Key phrases were repeated 7 times, or multiples of 7. This ritualized repetition was believed to increase effectiveness. The exorcist's voice would rise and fall, sometimes shouting commands, sometimes speaking in measured formal tones. He might use ritual gestures, pointing at the patient, making sweeping motions as if physically driving the demon away. Physical expulsion. Day 3. In many rituals, the demon's departure was dramatized through physical means. The ashapu would create a figurine representing the demon, usually from clay or dough, sometimes quite elaborate, sometimes simple. This figurine would then be destroyed in ways symbolizing the demon's defeat, thrown into fire, reducing it to ash, cast into flowing water, carrying it away, buried at a crossroads or in a cemetery, trapping it, broken into pieces and scattered. As the figurine was destroyed, the exorcist would declare, "As I destroy this image, so is the demon destroyed. As this image burns, so the demon is burned. As this image dissolves, so the demon's power dissolves." Some rituals involved the patient ritually stepping on the figurine before its destruction, symbolically taking power over the demon. Protection and prevention. Day 4. After expelling the demon, preventing its return was crucial. The Ashipu would provide the patient with permanent amulets. These would be worn constantly, usually small clay tablets inscribed with protective formulas or bronze plaques with images of protective spirits. The Ashipu would ritually consecrate these objects, activating their protective power. Household protections. Inscribed tablets would be installed at doorways and windows. Figurines of protective spirits might be buried under thresholds. Daily rituals. The patient would be taught simple protective prayers to recite each morning and evening. These weren't complex but established ongoing spiritual hygiene. Behavioral restrictions. Sometimes the patient would be given specific instructions. Avoid certain places. Don't travel at night. Maintain ritual purity through regular bathing. Make regular offerings at the temple. Follow-up. A good Ashipu would check on the patient days or weeks later. If symptoms recurred, more intensive rituals might be necessary, or a new diagnosis might be made. These elaborate rituals weren't free. An Ashipu expected payment commensurate with his skill and the complexity of the case. These structures. Payment might include direct payment in silver or grain, animals for sacrifice, which the exorcist would often keep portions of, valuable goods, oil, fine cloth, jewelry, ongoing obligations, regular gifts at festivals, first fruits of harvest. Wealthy families could afford the most skilled exorcists and the most elaborate rituals. Poor families might only afford brief rituals by less experienced practitioners, or might rely on simple amulets and self-performed prayers. Social implications. This economic reality meant that demon protection followed wealth lines. The wealthy had better supernatural protection than the poor, just as they had better medical care, better nutrition, better everything. Interestingly, some texts suggest that particularly righteous or skilled exorcists would treat poor patients for reduced fees or even free, as a form of piety. But this was individual charity, not systematic policy. Temple economics. Many exorcists were attached to temples, receiving salaries from temple revenues. In exchange, they provided services to the community and maintained the temple's spiritual defenses. This institutional arrangement ensured that even moderate communities had access to qualified exorcists. Major temples maintained libraries of ritual texts accumulated over generations. These libraries preserved the collective knowledge of the profession, and young exorcists came to study there, copying texts and learning from masters. Archaeological evidence of practice. We're not merely speculating about these practices. Extensive evidence exists in both texts and material culture. Libraries. The Great Library of Ashurbanipal at Nineveh, discovered by 19th century archaeologists, contained thousands of tablets, many dealing with magic, medicine, and exorcism. These weren't secret texts, but working libraries used by practicing exorcists. Model livers. Museums hold numerous clay liver models inscribed with interpretive guides. These were teaching tools and reference works showing that divination was a standardized practice taught systematically. Amulets and figurines. The sheer quantity of protective objects found throughout Mesopotamia, tens of thousands in museum collections, countless more still buried, testifies to the ubiquity of these practices. Ritual spaces. Some excavated houses show clear evidence of ritual activity, traces of fumigation, deliberately placed figurines, inscribed tablets in specific locations. One house in showed a complete set of protective installations, allowing archaeologists to reconstruct the ritual procedures in detail. Administrative records. Temple and palace archives include payment records to exorcists, inventories of ritual materials, and correspondence about demon-related issues. These mundane bureaucratic documents prove that demon beliefs weren't occasional superstitions, but integrated into daily administrative life. Beyond addressing individual cases, the practice of exorcism served broader social functions. Medical care. In the absence of effective physical medicine for many conditions, exorcism provided psychological comfort and structure during illness. The elaborate attention, the sense of agency, the hope provided, these had real therapeutic value, even when the underlying supernatural beliefs were incorrect. Social cohesion. Shared beliefs about demons and their treatment created common cultural ground. Everyone, regardless of social class, understood the basic principles. This shared knowledge facilitated community solidarity. Knowledge preservation. The exorcist class preserved literacy and learning during a period when most people couldn't read. Libraries maintained by temples and exorcist guilds were crucial for cultural continuity. Psychological management. Exorcism rituals channeled anxiety and fear into structured, manageable forms. Instead of helpless terror, people had specific actions to take, experts to consult, rituals that promised protection. Meaning? Making. Perhaps most importantly, exorcism provided frameworks for making meaning of suffering. Illness and misfortune weren't random but had causes, demonic attack, and therefore could be addressed. This is psychologically healthier than accepting meaningless suffering. Conclusion. Sophisticated response to genuine needs. The practice of exorcism in ancient Mesopotamia reveals a sophisticated, organized response to genuine human needs. Yes, the underlying beliefs about demons were incorrect by modern standards, but the system built around those beliefs served real purposes and did so with remarkable complexity and thoughtfulness. The exorcists were educated professionals, not charlatans. Their training was rigorous, their knowledge extensive, their procedures standardized. They provided care to the best of their understanding within the intellectual framework available to them. We can respect the sophistication of the system while recognizing its limitations, and we can appreciate that the underlying human needs for explanation, for treatment, for hope, for meaning in suffering remain constant across millennia. As we approach the conclusion of our journey through Mesopotamian demonology, we'll consider the lasting legacy of these beliefs, how they influenced later traditions, and what modern people might learn from studying these ancient ideas. Part 9. Influence and Legacy. How Mesopotamian demons shaped later traditions. Mesopotamian civilization eventually fell. The languages died out, the cities were abandoned and buried under centuries of sand and wind. But the demons didn't disappear. They transformed, migrated, merged with new beliefs, and ultimately influenced the religious traditions that shape our world today. We examine now the afterlife of Mesopotamian demons, not in the underworld, but in the living traditions of Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and beyond. The Babylonian exile, point of cultural transfer. The crucial moment of transmission occurred in the 6th century BCE, when the Neo-Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar II conquered Jerusalem and exiled the Jewish elite to Babylon. For nearly 70 years, Jewish scholars, priests, and leaders lived in the heart of Mesopotamian culture. They learned Aramaic, the common language of the empire. They encountered Babylonian religious ideas, including elaborate demon lore. And when they eventually returned to rebuild Jerusalem, they brought these ideas with them, transformed and integrated into Jewish monotheism. Evidence of influence. We can trace this influence in several ways. The Hebrew Bible books written or edited during and after the exile, including parts of Isaiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel, show clear Mesopotamian influences in their imagery, particularly regarding demons and cosmic battles. Later Jewish texts, especially the Talmud and various midrashim compiled in the first millennium CE, contain extensive demon lore that closely parallels Mesopotamian beliefs, though adapted to monotheistic theology. Specific demon transformations. Let's trace how individual Mesopotamian demons evolved into Jewish and later Christian demonology. Lilith's journey. We've already discussed Lilith's evolution from the Sumerian Lilitu through Hebrew scripture to medieval Jewish mysticism. But the journey continued. In the Kabbalistic text, the Zohar, 13th century CE, Lilith becomes a major figure, the first wife of Adam, a queen of demons, consort of Satan. She embodies dangerous female sexuality and autonomy, much as her Mesopotamian predecessor did. Christian medieval texts incorporated Lilith into their demon hierarchies. She appears in various grimoires and works of demonology, usually as a succubus who seduces men and harms infants. Even today, Lilith appears in modern occult practice, in fantasy literature, and, remarkably, in feminist reinterpretation as a symbol of female empowerment. A demon from ancient Sumer remains relevant 4,000 years later. Pazuzu's absence. Interestingly, Pazuzu didn't transfer into later traditions, at least not under his own name. The specific concept of a demon king who protects didn't fit well with later monotheistic frameworks, which tended toward clearer good/evil distinctions. However, the general practice of invoking powerful spiritual beings for protection persisted. In Judaism, angels took this role. In Christianity, saints and angels. In Islam, certain jinn could be called upon for protection. The underlying logic, using supernatural power, even potentially dangerous power, for protection, survived even when specific demon names didn't. The 7 demons, the concept of 7 evil beings, cosmic forces of destruction, appears repeatedly in later traditions. Judaism, various Jewish texts mention 7 demons or 7 angels of destruction. The number 7, already significant in Mesopotamian thought, became even more important in Jewish numerology. Christianity. The Book of Revelation describes a 7-headed dragon representing chaos and evil. 7 demons are cast out of Mary Magdalene in the Gospels. Medieval Christian demonology organized demons into 7 categories, corresponding to the 7 deadly sins. Islam. While Islamic demonology developed independently in many ways, the number 7 retains significance. 7 gates of hell, 7 levels of paradise, the organizational principle persists. Transformation of exorcism, Jewish, Christian, and Islamic traditions all developed exorcism practices that show Mesopotamian influence. Similar structures: diagnosis of possession, invocation of divine authority, commanding the demon to depart, protection against return. These steps mirror Mesopotamian practice. Use of names, knowing and speaking the demon's name to gain power over it, remains central in later traditions, directly continuing Mesopotamian practice. Amulets and inscriptions, protective texts, inscribed objects, holy words worn on the body, all continue Mesopotamian traditions with different theological content, but similar forms. Broader conceptual influences. Beyond specific demons, Mesopotamian thought influenced how later cultures conceptualized evil, the supernatural, and the relationship between physical and spiritual causation of illness. Dualism. While Mesopotamian thought wasn't strictly dualistic, it recognized chaos and order in complex interplay, not absolute opposition. Later exposure to Zoroastrian dualism combined with Mesopotamian demon lore to create increasingly dualistic frameworks. By the time Christianity developed its demon theology, Satan and his demons stood in absolute opposition to God and the angels, a more binary system than anything in Mesopotamian thought. Yet the detailed demon hierarchies, the specific types of demons with different functions and powers, these came from Mesopotamian traditions. Medical versus spiritual causation. The Mesopotamian distinction between the exorcist, Ashipu, and physician, Asu, prefigured later debates about when illness had spiritual causes requiring religious treatment versus physical causes requiring medical treatment. This debate continues today in religious communities that must decide when to seek medical care and when to rely on prayer and spiritual healing. The ancient Mesopotamians' pragmatic approach, using both as appropriate, recognizing that some conditions required one and some the other, remains relevant. Ritual structure. The basic structure of religious ritual: purification, invocation of divine authority, performance of sacred actions, installation of ongoing protection, was refined in Mesopotamia and passed down through subsequent traditions. Whether it's a Christian baptism, a Jewish circumcision, or an Islamic prayer, the underlying ritual logic often echoes Mesopotamian patterns. Create sacred space, invoke divine presence, perform transformative action, establish ongoing relationship. Geographic spread. Mesopotamian demon beliefs spread far beyond the Near East, westward, through contact with the Mediterranean world. Greek, Roman, eventually European, Mesopotamian ideas infiltrated Western magical and religious traditions. Grimoires, medieval and early modern books of magic, frequently invoke demons with Mesopotamian origins or names derived from Mesopotamian sources. Eastward, through trade routes and cultural exchange, Mesopotamian ideas reached Persia, Central Asia, and potentially even India and China. Scholars debate the extent of influence, but clear parallels exist between Mesopotamian demon types and beings in Persian, Hindu, and Buddhist traditions. Southward, into Arabia, where pre-Islamic Arabian demon lore shows Mesopotamian influence, which then fed into Islamic jinn traditions. Persistence. Some scholars argue that certain folk beliefs in modern Middle Eastern cultures, protective practices around childbirth, beliefs about evil eye, specific rituals at thresholds, maintain continuity with ancient Mesopotamian practices transmitted through oral tradition across millennia, modern archaeological and scholarly understanding, the scientific study of Mesopotamian demonology, began in the 19th century as archaeologists excavated ancient cities and began deciphering cuneiform texts. 19th century. Early scholars were often Christian clergy who viewed these discoveries through theological lenses. They emphasized how Mesopotamian demon beliefs were primitive superstitions that Judaism and Christianity had transcended. They were interested primarily in proving biblical superiority. Early 20th century. As archaeology became more professional and secular, scholars began studying Mesopotamian religion on its own terms. Major works cataloged demons, translated incantation texts, and analyzed ritual practices without the previous theological agenda. Mid-20th century, anthropological approaches recognized the social and psychological functions of demon beliefs. Scholars began asking not just what did they believe, but why did these beliefs persist, and what purposes did they serve? Late 20th, early 21st century, current scholarship emphasizes comparative study with other cultures, recognition of sophisticated theological and philosophical thinking, study of how ordinary people, not just elites, lived with these beliefs, material culture evidence of daily practices, medical history perspectives on disease and treatment. Modern museums, major museums worldwide, maintain extensive Mesopotamian collections, allowing researchers and the public to engage with original artifacts. The British Museum, the Louvre, the Oriental Institute, the Iraq Museum, tragically damaged but partially restored, all preserve these tangible links to ancient belief. What modern people can learn. Why should contemporary people, most of whom don't believe in demons, care about Mesopotamian demonology? Historical understanding. These beliefs profoundly influenced the major world religions. Understanding their origins helps us understand modern religious ideas more deeply. Human psychology. The psychological needs these beliefs addressed, explaining suffering, managing fear, providing agency in threatening situations, remain constant. We may explain anxiety and misfortune differently, but we face the same fundamental human challenges. Cultural sophistication. Studying Mesopotamian thought challenges Western assumptions about primitive ancient peoples. These were sophisticated thinkers working within different frameworks, not ignorant, superstitious primitives. Medical history. Understanding how ancient peoples conceptualized illness and treatment helps us appreciate modern medicine's development and reminds us that our current understanding, while more accurate, will likely seem naive to future generations. Religious literacy. In an increasingly interconnected world, understanding the deep history of religious beliefs promotes mutual respect and comprehension across cultures. Philosophical reflection. Mesopotamian approaches to questions like, why do the innocent suffer, or how should we understand evil, remain philosophically interesting, offering perspectives different from later monotheistic or modern secular frameworks. The ultimate legacy. Persistent questions. Perhaps the most important legacy of Mesopotamian demon lore is the questions it preserves. Questions humans have asked for at least 5,000 years. Why do we suffer? What causes disease and misfortune? How can we protect ourselves and those we love? What lies beyond death? How should we respond to fear and uncertainty? What role do unseen forces play in our lives? The Mesopotamians answered these questions through their demon mythology. We answer them differently, but the questions persist because they address fundamental aspects of human existence. Part 10. Conclusion. Shadows from the distant past. We've traveled far in these hours together, from the depths of ancient Sumer to the heights of Assyrian power, from individual household fears to cosmic threats, from personal demons to cultural systems. Let us reflect on what we've learned. The demons we've met: Lamashtu, the child-snatcher, embodiment of every parent's worst fear, particularly terrible in an age of devastating infant mortality. Pazuzu, the demon king who protects, showing us that power was never simply good or evil, but could be directed. The Lilitu, night demons of dangerous female power, reflecting and reinforcing social anxieties about gender and sexuality. The Utukku, restless spirits of the improperly dead, reminding the living of obligations to the dead and the importance of ritual. The Sebettu, the seven evil gods, cosmic forces threatening the very fabric of reality, requiring proportional community response. And the many lesser demons, Allu, Gallu, Rabisu, and countless others, each with specific characteristics, each explaining specific forms of human suffering. What united them? Despite their diversity, these demons shared common characteristics. They explained the unexplainable. In a world before germ theory, before psychiatry, before meteorology, they made sense of disease, madness, and disaster. They provided agency. Against threats that were actually beyond control, demon beliefs offered specific actions, rituals, amulets, prayers that gave people something to do rather than suffer helplessly. They reflected real concerns: child mortality, sudden death, mental illness, the dangers of transition and change. These were genuine threats, and the demons embodied them in comprehensible form. They served social functions, reinforcing burial practices, encouraging proper ritual, maintaining priestly class, structuring gender roles. The beliefs did cultural work beyond individual psychology. The system behind the beliefs, we've seen that Mesopotamian demonology wasn't random superstition, but a sophisticated system. Detailed taxonomy of demon types, careful diagnostic procedures, standardized treatment protocols, professional practitioners with extensive training, economic structures supporting the system, preservation of knowledge through written texts and institutional libraries. This was, within its cultural context, rational and systematic, comparable to any pre-modern medical or religious system, and in some ways more sophisticated than contemporary approaches in other cultures. The practitioners, the exorcist priests, Ashipu, emerge from our study as educated professionals providing genuine care within their understanding. They weren't charlatans or fools, but skilled practitioners working within an intellectual framework that made sense given available knowledge. Their training was rigorous, their practices standardized, their social role important. They preserved literacy and learning, maintained cultural traditions, and provided psychological comfort during humanity's most difficult experiences: illness, death, and unexplainable suffering. The legacy. These ancient beliefs didn't vanish but transformed, feeding into later religious traditions. Specific demons evolved. Lilith became a figure in Jewish mysticism and Christian demonology. Practices continued, Exorcism rituals in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam show clear structural similarities to Mesopotamian precedents. Concepts persisted. The 7 deadly sins, 7 demons, 7 gates of hell, all echo Mesopotamian fascination with that number. Even today, 4,000 years after these beliefs first emerged, we encounter their descendants in religious practice, in popular culture, in psychological frameworks for understanding evil and suffering. What we can learn. Modern people, whether religious or secular, can learn from studying these ancient beliefs. Humility. Our ancestors weren't stupid. They were intelligent people, working with limited knowledge, doing their best to understand and manage their world. Our own current understanding, while more accurate in many ways, will likely seem naive to future generations. Continuity. Human concerns remain constant. The anxieties that generated Mesopotamian demon beliefs, fear for our children, confusion about suffering, worry about death, desire for protection, remain universal. Sophistication. Ancient cultures were far more complex and sophisticated than popular imagination often acknowledges. Mesopotamian civilization developed writing, mathematics, astronomy, literature, law codes, and complex religious systems. Studying any aspect of their culture reveals impressive intellectual achievements. Function. Beliefs serve purposes beyond their literal truth value. Whether or not demons exist, demon beliefs served important psychological, social, and cultural functions. Understanding this helps us analyze contemporary beliefs more thoughtfully. Respect. Every culture deserves study on its own terms, not merely as a stepping stone to superior modern understanding. Mesopotamian religion was sophisticated and meaningful to those who practiced it, and understanding it enriches our appreciation of human cultural diversity. Final reflections. As dawn approaches, as this long night of historical exploration draws to a close, consider the remarkable fact that we can know these things at all. For thousands of years, Mesopotamian civilization was lost, cities buried, languages forgotten, texts unreadable. The demons seem to have vanished entirely, but archaeologists dug into ancient mounds, scholars deciphered strange wedge-shaped writing, and gradually the ancient world spoke again. Every fact we've discussed tonight came from painstaking recovery, excavating fragile clay tablets, carefully piecing together broken artifacts, learning dead languages, comparing fragmentary texts, reconstructing rituals from scattered evidence. The demons of Mesopotamia now exist primarily in museums and academic texts, in historical consciousness rather than fearful belief. But they serve their original culture well, and studying them serves us well too, connecting us to our deep human past, reminding us of the constants in human experience, and teaching us humility about our own current understanding. Rest now. You've journeyed far through the darkness of ancient belief. You've met beings that terrified our ancestors, learned about systems they developed to combat those fears, and traced the influence of these ideas across millennia. The history continues. There are more demons to explore, more cultures to examine, more connections to trace. But for tonight, let this be enough. The ancient Mesopotamians believed demons were real and developed elaborate systems to protect against them. We know better, or at least we know differently. But we face our own uncertainties, our own fears, our own need to make meaning of suffering. Perhaps, in the end, we're not so different from those ancient peoples who looked into the darkness and created demons to explain what they saw there. We simply have different names for our fears. Rest now, knowing that humans have faced the darkness for thousands of years, have always sought to understand it, have always found ways to continue despite fear and uncertainty. The demons of Mesopotamia no longer hunt, but their memory teaches us about human resilience, ingenuity, and the eternal quest to make sense of a challenging world. Thank you for joining this journey through ancient belief. May your sleep be peaceful, undisturbed by demons of any era.